Okay, so let's talk about the idea of an almost relationship. And I did a post the other day that basically said when you're in this relationship that you feel like you're settling for, and how do you often we will live our lives in a space where we don't feel fully satisfied, which is different from the idea that a relationship at times won't be gratifying or satisfying. That's like saying, I will always love my partner and no matter what they do, I'm always going to be their biggest fan. Well, sometimes your partner is going to do shit that doesn't make you their biggest fan, right? Like sometimes you're going to love your partner always, but you're not going to like your partner always. And that's an important distinction about human relationships, which is no one is perfect. No one is going to be free from human error. No one is going to be mistakeless. And that's a good thing, because if you allow your partner to make mistakes and you are compassionate to them, they will be compassionate to the mistakes you make. Now, if you allow your partner to live in the world of acting as if, if all their behaviors are actually not okay, then we have a totally different conversation, right? It's kind of like if someone makes a mistake but they're moving towards expansion and growth, then that's different if someone keeps making mistakes and is not expanding and growing. One of them that people are learning from the space that we provide or that we co-create together, where we're saying, hey, we're both human and we're not always going to handle every situation perfectly, and that's okay. But what we're going to do is we're going to strive towards improving and becoming better people and being better communicators. And that's the beauty of a good relationship. There's this line, I think, that really happens a lot in relationship, which is we enter a relationship or we wake up within one that is not necessarily satisfying or how we want it to be. There's a lot of reasons why this awakening happens. It can happen for so many reasons. But usually it's because we've just learned something about the world and possibility and what we want from love, and we realize when we wake up that we're not in that. We're not currently in that. And it's easy to throw away a relationship that is seemingly not that and just leave it. And that's a lot of the conversation that people have today is about abandoning a relationship that is okay. And that's usually the response to my post was people saying, well, you can't just leave things because they're not perfect. People will take this message in a way and make it about, oh, well, you can't, relationships aren't always going to be the best fit. Yes, and there are two ways that we sort of participate in relationships like that. One is that a lot of people stay in relationships and chose relationships from a place where they settled from the beginning. They knew on the first, second, third, fourth, fifth date that this person was not necessarily the person for them, and they stayed in it. And then these people 20 years later want to get out of it, or 10 years later. And I'm like, shit, you can do whatever you want to do. See, I explained before that your relationship outcomes are not my priority. If I make my priority that you have to stay in every relationship you're in, then I'm going to curate the content that I give you, when for me it's just about you finding truth. And you're going to choose what you're going to choose anyways. So you're going to look for, because I've had people say once they go through a breakup, send me a message and be like, hey, can you not write about leaving someone or breaking up right now, because my partner reads your stuff and she has believed your personal empowerment bullshit, or he has believed it, and they left me. And I'm like, I'm not changing my content. No matter what I post, they're going to look for the evidence of what they want within what I write anyways. If you're looking for the reasons to leave a relationship, you will look for all the evidence to support leaving if you want to. Now, if you're looking to stay, you'll also read everything from the perspective that you'll want to stay. And sometimes staying is the right idea, and sometimes going is the right idea. And you know what? You won't know exactly what's right. I can't tell you what's right. You're the one who knows what's right. And if you happen to choose the wrong thing, it's the right thing because you learn that it's the wrong choice. So there's always lessons in learning in these experiences. And that's why I never project what I think you need to do. I could tell you if you're, I'm speaking in the context of if you're in a relationship that is abusive, that is unhealthy, that is, then you have to leave those things. You have to seek support to get out of them. So this isn't in the context of those specifically. But when we're in that gray area where we are not necessarily satisfied, but not necessarily dissatisfied, right? Now that's a tough one, because it's natural for us to throw a relationship away when really the best thing, especially depending on the age, how long we've been with someone, because we start to resent them. We start to get mad at them that we've abandoned ourselves, or that we can't be ourselves, or we can't create the relationship with them. But we might never have actually invited them into that space with us. So as we wake up, as we desire more, we then sometimes push our partners away, right? We push them away because we're not sure we can be ourselves with them. But we never actually allow them to start to love who we are discovering we are, if that makes sense. And that's because we're afraid they're going to reject us, because we might not have been fully ourselves. Now that we've understood this new part of us, we might not have been fully ourselves when we entered the relationship and have been participating in it. So what ends up being is, it's like a couple people wearing masks are participating in the relationship, and all of a sudden you take the mask off and you're like, well, what happens if they don't like who I actually am? Right. And this can come for many reasons. One, we can participate in relationships as a fraud because we wanted to get them. And then we wake up and we're like, man, this is fucking so tired. This is so tiring to pretend to be someone I'm not. And the word persona actually comes from Greek Roman theater, which is, the persona was the mask that people wore, or the masks of the characters they would play within a play. And so per is the opening, and son is the sound it would make from coming out. So it tells you that we've even taken this idea of a persona and made it about like who we actually are, when they were actually the masks we wore in theater. I think that's so fascinating to learn the etymology of a word, and to really realize that, and Alan Watts talks about it. He says, we're just a bunch of actors. We're a bunch of genuine fakes. And to think of the world being like this drama where each of us are playing a role, as Shakespeare talks about. So where do we go from here, right? Well, the first part is, if you don't feel connected to yourself in a relationship, or you don't feel connected to your partner, it's always about connecting back to yourself first. And sometimes we do need to be incredibly selfish to get to know who we are. We don't know how to have boundaries around our personality. So one of the ways as humans we know how to preserve ourselves is to completely withdraw and go into a cocoon and discover who we are, and really in that space need to figure it out, and we don't feel protected being in relationship with other people as we're in this chaos. Because in some way, there's already been a rejection of self that occurred to enter the relationship, which is weird to hear, right? Like, we might have rejected ourselves since a young age. And so when we're in relationship with someone else and we're upset with them that we can't be who we are, it's literally because we've not allowed ourselves to be who we are. And then we blame them for holding us hostage to who we used to be or who we pretended to be. So that's a little more complex way of, I hope that simplifies it in some sense, but it sounds a little complex. And let me make it, or spell it out a little better. So what happens is we wake up and we want to be ourselves, and we want to do this in relationship. Well, at first there's a resistance from our partner, because our partner is getting, our partner gets triggered by our authenticity, because they often associate our waking up and our authenticity. They start to fear that we're going to grow and leave them. So that's when they try to cling more to who we are. They might have a couple reactions. One, reject who you're becoming, not support it, because from a fear-based unconscious perspective, they're afraid that you're going to outgrow them or leave them. Your growth will mean leaving. And your authenticity also scares them, because their own authenticity has been hidden too. And so you've now created fear for them because they've rejected themselves too. So your own expression and taking back your story or reunion with self is causing them to experience the pain of their own disconnection from themselves and their own fear of being authentic. So remember that people sell out their authenticity to belong. To religions, to cultures, to societies. We sell out our authenticity in order to belong. And when we wake up to our inauthenticity, we usually wake up because we have depression, we have anxiety, we have sadness, we have all these different feelings. And what happens is that we wake up to the feelings and they get to be too much. And we have a choice: rejoin self or don't. Give birth to who we are or don't. And I really believe this is the core reason that we abuse any type of substance or get addicted to anything, is or to our phones or to anything, including relationship, love, sex, all the things, anything that gives you a short dopamine hit. The reason we get addicted to anything is because we are avoiding the pain of the disconnection from ourselves. And that's why when you can start to actually pay attention to, where am I not me? Where am I inauthentic? And where we can start to separate our experience from our partner's experience. And if we're single, then it's our experience from our family's experience, from our world's experience. Because you got to remember, when you decide to be who you are, to be authentic, whatever that means for you, you're also going to really challenge your family. You're going to challenge your family big time. Anyone who's around you who's also lived with the agreement to not be themselves is going to get incredibly fearful and then try to hold on tighter again to the beliefs that they have. So whenever you challenge a core belief in anyone, they'll often cling tighter to it. And you can see that in the context of politics and in the context of religion, and what we cling to and what we fight for. We often fight even further for that. And I see this all the time with something like someone who's afraid of their own authenticity, and they might fight really hard against gay marriage because on some part of them, they might fear their own sexuality and they're afraid of it. They can't embrace it. So they fight against the principle that they're hiding shame from. And I think that's a really fascinating thing about humans is when we believe that a core pillar of our identity is actually possibly wrong, we cling tighter to the core belief. We cling tighter to it. A core belief might be something like what you believe about spirituality and God. That's a real good identity of what people base themselves upon. I'm a Christian. I'm a Muslim. Any of these, what is the core belief about it? Or literally when you're hanging out with, if you grew up in a religion that says if you don't believe in God, then you go to hell. Well, that doesn't seem like a very open way of being, right? And what happens is we then start to judge and vilify other people because we can't in our hearts actually believe that's true, right? Just like you can't in your heart not believe that everyone has the right to union with whoever the fuck they want to marry. Whoever you want to be with, you could choose to be with. But when it threatens someone else's identity and their own belief system, they don't know how to separate those things. And that's why as we all grow in this experience and we have conversations like this, one of the greatest positions you can ever take is to hold two opposing views, is to talk to someone who doesn't agree with what you agree with, but not vilify them for their way of seeing the world. Because you have to remember that how someone else sees the world is because of how they were raised, right? When someone is raised to believe certain things, when you challenge their belief system lovingly or not so lovingly, it causes them to question themselves and their upbringing. And it causes them to question everything. It's kind of like if you see the conversation on circumcision. This is just a simple example. Women have no problem actually saying, circumcision, why would we actually circumcise little boys? There's no reason to, there's not a health benefit. And if you argue with that, just Google the actual truth about those things, watch American Circumcision, the movie. There is no health benefit to circumcision. But what's really fascinating is people who have circumcised their kid have a hard time actually doing that, even though they're doing the best they could with what they had. And the other side is men who've been circumcised have a really hard time, even though it should be an easy argument to say, that's not okay, we shouldn't be doing that. And so you start to see that when opposing views challenge us and our core beliefs and what we want to believe about ourselves, and that our family could have hurt us, our parent could have chosen to hurt us, even though that wasn't a conscious choice. It wasn't on purpose. It was because people taught them that they needed to do that. Well, do you see how the context and the conversation about circumcision or God or anything becomes the way we structure it is, you taught me to believe this, but if all of a sudden I believe that everyone has the right to a certain type of relationship, and it then challenges everything I was raised to believe, then I now have to think about my relationship to my parents. I now have to think about my relationship to my society and my culture and my family and everything. And I have to, if one thing wasn't true, then what else isn't true? And that's a really important position to begin to take. And it can feel overwhelming at first, which is if I've not been told the truth about things, then that can be overwhelming, because then it's like, well, shit, what have I been believing that isn't actually truth, isn't actually real? And that's when you start to take an inventory of who you are and what aligns with your heart and what doesn't. Now, often the things that don't align with our hearts will actually cause us to be in conflict with the cultural narratives and the religious narratives and the societal narratives, the national narratives. You start to see that all of these things are one. They're all the same sort of thing. And that's why when we talk about living in these relationships that are unfulfilling, it's not about leaving first. And sometimes the answer will be to leave. There's no judgment on whatever you choose, because you always get to where you need to be. But it's not always about leaving. First, it's about discovering who you are. You might not be able to do that within a relationship. I get that. And the other side of it is, once you discover who you are also unconsciously or subconsciously inviting your partner to step into the same space, and they get to choose if they want to or don't. Some people don't want to wake up. And I don't mean that in a condescending way where waking up is a hierarchy of I'm awake, you're not. I mean literally, we are the only species that is aware of its awareness. We're the only species that thinks about how it thinks, and like, if you're not aware that you're happy, then happiness is a useless emotion, right? You're just walking around like, ah. But you don't actually experience it because you're not aware of the feeling. And this is true about all feelings, this is about all feelings that we want to discover. All feelings bring in information for us, and we want to start to be aware of our awareness. We want to think about how we think. We want to start to consider, why do I believe what I believe, and why do I act the way I act in relationship? Why have I taken on this role in a relationship where I do the laundry or I go to work to a job I hate? Why have I taken on this role? Where did I learn it? Do I like it or do I not? And that is where we start to connect to what is true for us versus the story we've been living that isn't even ours. I was talking to the angry therapist the other day, John. He's hilarious. And he was saying, yeah, that's very much waking up to a blueprint, waking up to the blueprints that you've been taught. And really, when you start to do this, when you start to question everything, you're going to piss off people who don't like your questions, because you're starting to make their own existence be in question. Why would anybody want that? People don't want that. People don't want you to wake up. People don't want you to be aware of your awareness. People don't want you to question your faith. They don't want you to question, because you're not questioning God, quote unquote, when you're questioning your belief system and what works and what doesn't. You're questioning the structure of how we're supposed to praise a God. You're questioning the structure of how we're supposed to live in relationship, And what a beautiful gift it is to be curious, because the same curiosity that you have about why the world works the way it works and why you work the way you work is the same curiosity you need to learn to meet your partner when they're triggered and to meet yourself when you're triggered. The openness to a different possibility is that you step out of the role that you have in conflict with your partner, because all of a sudden, instead of just taking it as someone else's word that this is how the world works, you start to question it. And that's the same thing when you get triggered. You go, maybe there's another way. Maybe there's another way. And when you're fighting with your partner and they piss you off, and you check in with the pissed offness, whatever that is in your body, and you go, maybe there's another way. How do I meet this with grace? And that is the same grace that's required from you when you meet someone who has a different political view. That's the same grace you meet anyone with who opposes what you believe in any way, because you hope that they will meet you with the same grace. But if you stand firm in this anger, and I'm not talking about healthy anger, but aggression, they will meet you with aggression. This is why in relationship research, the Gottmans have research that shows that one of the essential skills of a great relationship is having a soft startup, which is that fights end how they start. So when you start your conflicts and your conversations with openness and curiosity, so it might be something like, instead of saying like, you never do blah, 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 you would be like, hey, do you have a second to chat right now? What a different way of approaching a fucking conversation, right? Giving someone a choice instead of just bulldozing them with emotion. And they're allowed to say no. They're allowed to be like, I actually don't have a second. I'm in the midst of doing this thing. But what we're doing there is we're usually challenging them to see, are we more important than the thing we're making them choose between? That's not fair, because you're going to lose, because that's exactly what you're looking for. You're looking to test them to actually fucking get the outcome, the confirmation that you're not important enough. The research also shows that the moment that you begin comparing your partner to imagined or real alternatives is the beginning of the death of your relationship. Because you're going to start to look for their flaws and start to see the benefits or positive outcome of someone else. Which doesn't mean that that doesn't exist. It's just if you really want to look for what your relationship could be, you can't start from that space. So, and you got to catch yourself, of course, because it's human to do that. Well, that guy spoke so much nicer to me in the lineup at Starbucks today. Or, oh, the way that girl said hi. I mean, she's interested in me. Why isn't my partner asking me questions, you know? So we start to do that. We start to create an inventory of all the ways they don't love us. But we're missing a bunch. We're missing a bunch of ways they do, a bunch of the ways they try. So the first part is asking, can we have a chat? Or do you have a moment? And the person gets to say yes or no. But the rule is that they have to return to the conversation within 24 hours. So if you need space to process things or you need space, remember that you're usually triggering someone who has an abandonment wound and a rejection wound. That's just how it works. That's why you're in love with the people you're in love with, because you wound them and they wound you. The way all relationships are containers for healing. You are attracted to people who piss you off in the same way one of your parents pissed you off. Or you're attracted to people who don't give you what a parent didn't give you, right? So what you do is you engage with them, you ask them if they have something, do you have a moment? And then you bring to them what you want to talk about. Now you don't start with, I notice you never take the garbage out. That shit ain't gonna go anywhere. So the next step is starting your statements with I, or in my experience, or when this happens, not when you, right? So when you actually start to work on how you show up to conflict, you will also invite your partner to actually show up to conflict differently too. Now, what happens is our nervous systems are coded in those moments we usually are fused with a younger version of ourselves. And what I mean by that is, if you think about when you're in conflict, and I just want you to think about it in this moment, and I want you to just allow yourself to answer this question without trying to come up with the answer and the right answer. I just want you to let yourself naturally come up with an answer, and then I want you to write it down in the comments. When I get really triggered, when I get really flooded, the age I feel is, and just write down what age that is for you. And I'd love to see, because I think everyone would love to see what age you feel, because they probably feel a similar age. So what age do you feel when you get triggered, when you get flooded, when you get reactive? And it could be a range of ages. But what age do you feel, right? And you'll usually see that they are ages of youth, right? They are ages of being a kid. 23, they're at moments when we usually needed a skill set that we didn't have, or we needed to yell something or say something or stand up for ourselves, or really step into our power. But we didn't, because if we had, we likely would have lost ourselves, and there was a risk of abandonment and not belonging, not feeling like we fit in. That's in family, and that's usually in these experiences, it's usually in our family, and it's also in school. And it's with romantic partners too. And so what happens is we fuse with that age. So when we get triggered, our nervous system brings us back to how we were in that moment. So you can think of it like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. When PTSD gets triggered, there's a template in the person's mind that when they hear a bang, that might be like a gunshot or a bomb that they experienced. They might hear a car backfire, same thing gets triggered, a cascade. This is the same. Conflict, same sort of situation. I don't feel loved. I don't feel safe. I don't feel belonging. I don't feel whatever it is. But it's usually a sensitive thing that we have. And we get triggered to go back to this age where it likely first happened or it was very memorable. And what happens is all of a sudden we go back to the coping or the compensatory strategy we had then, which might have been shutting down, which might have been yelling, which might have been withdrawing, which might have been getting critical. And so what happens is we haven't adulted ourselves out of that age. We haven't actually learned how to give so what is going on in that moment? So let's say, for example, I needed safety or I needed to be chosen. I needed to feel chosen. I needed to feel like I mattered to you. And what happens is we get to this moment where we're in conflict with the person. This happens at work too. This doesn't just happen in romantic relationships. That'd be nice, right? This happens at work. This happens with family. It usually started with family. Happens with friends. It happens with any time that tender part of us gets triggered. I don't feel like you're respecting me. I don't feel like you're considering me. I don't feel like I matter to you. So you get stuck in that moment. And what you're seeking from your partner is to give you the thing you've never gotten. But they're also, the way you're responding to them is you're actually triggering them in the exact same moment. They're now a devolved, younger version of themselves. And so it's two 10-year-olds having an argument. No adult is in the room at this moment. And so it takes one person to become the adult, which doesn't mean your needs go out. It just means that how you get your need met changes. So the trigger doesn't go away. The part that's sensitive to you when you don't feel considered or you don't feel loved or you don't feel safe, that part of you doesn't go anywhere. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to feel sensitive or triggered to that anymore. You need that. That's your radar. That's your wisdom. Your wisdom is present in that moment and it's saying, when this happens, something bad has happened in the past, let's code this. Let's code this. Let's not lose this because we need the wisdom of the child. The wisdom of the child identifies the threat. Be present to the child. But what we need is adult versions of ourselves who, instead of saying, you never do that, the adult of us says, oh my gosh, when this happens, what I really want to do is shut down. Whoa, what the fuck? That's a different outcome, right? Or when someone comes to us with feedback, hey, you know, when we do this, this is hard for me. This is what happens. Or when you do this, I feel hurt. When we hear that, we're like, no. When you do that, we get defensive. But imagine if the adult version of us says, that must be really hard. Imagine if the next time you feel triggered and you're normally someone who gets defensive, you actually say, I can see some truth in that. Wow, you're right. I do that. I don't want to do that. That's not okay. That must be really hard for you to experience that. Now what's happened is you have two adults acting as children in a conflict. And now we have one adult who's inviting the other child, telling the other child, first off, I love you. And secondly, what I need from you is this. Bam. They get the invitation to rise. Now remember, there's a line from Byron Katie that I love, which is, you can't have war with one person. So as soon as one person lays down the arms, the other one is invited to rise. The second side of this that you must be compassionate for, and you've likely experienced it, is when you decide to no longer be part of the pattern, the other person doesn't trust that the pattern's changing. Because when a relationship or couples have a dance, it's a cycle. And a good way to know what your cycle is because that is familiar. And a good way to know what your cycle is to just complete this sentence. When you do this, it causes me to do this, which causes you to do this and me to do this. So for example, it might be, when you get angry, I get defensive, which makes you get more angry, which makes me shut down. Right, so now we have what Mona Fishbane, you can look her up, we now have what Mona Fishbane calls a vulnerability cycle. We have what people do in this dance, and if you want to know what your dance is, right, just complete those sentences. And the other side of it is start to look for where you escalate, right? Or where you separate. And those are moments where you can put down your sword and say, I love us too much to continue this way. And you have to be prepared that your partner might not trust it because they've never been loved through that moment. That's why when you meet someone who doesn't meet your chaos and your conflict, they don't dance in the same dance as you, so you might not be attracted to them because they don't fight the way you're familiar with fighting. They might fight in a more healthy way, or you might be the person who has the healthy way of handling conflict, and the other person doesn't trust you because they've always known that love was high levels of conflict and anxiety and anger. So when we can start to learn that our nervous systems can sometimes miscode chaos as love, and they can sometimes miscode or distrust safe human beings because the last time we might have felt safe, we were hurt. And that could be true for experiences of trauma from people we were supposed to trust. And rebuilding that trust is about rebuilding trust in ourselves first, because we often believed that if I didn't know that that was going to happen, then I can't trust myself anymore. So what I'll either do is I'll keep myself in cycles of pain, because at least that confirms the identity I have about myself, that I can't trust myself. Or I'll just withdraw from all relationships and I'll stay on the outskirts of them and I'll be an independent, strong person. But I'm not actually feeling connected to other people because I don't feel safe to be connected to other people, because when I am connected to other people, they hurt me. And I don't trust myself to stand up for myself. I don't trust myself to stand in my truth. Well, I think for the most part, we're all adults on this. And if we're not adults on here, welcome to the younger people. I wish that these conversations happened when I was a kid. But when you can start to invite the adult in you to these conversations, which is really the part of you that I don't want to say is only rational, because the child sort of irrationally loves, which is a beautiful thing about a child, irrationally loves and trusts. But at the exact same time, what we need to do is learn that the adult in us is also the warrior in us, the part of us that protects and curates what is allowed to get access to us. Both of those parts of us need to be developed, which is the part of us that loves openly, unconditionally, and the part of us that is a warrior that says, if we are going to love, here are the rules. Here's the way you need to interact with me. Because you have to remember, if every time you fold in relationship, if every time you fold and you don't stand up for yourself, then you won't feel safe to open your heart, because you won't feel like you're protected by yourself first. You need to be protected by yourself first, and then you'll feel safe to open your heart. But if you don't trust yourself to build a boundary where there needs to be one, then you will just blindly allow yourself to experience pain. And you'll know that this is birthed. You might blame it on the other person, and that's okay. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But what it is it's not a mature form of relationship, which is when that version of you shows up and says, your behavior is not okay. Then the little kid in you says, oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for finally having our back. I have been out here loving unrelentlessly. I've been out here loving anything with a heartbeat. I've been out here just wanting love and to be included and to be safely met and to finally have someone choose me. But do you see that the solution is the choosing of yourself? When you choose yourself and you show up for yourself in conversation, we are seeking for them to confirm that we're lovable and safe. No, and that's nice, don't get me wrong. But the real thing that you're seeking is from you, is to know that you're loved and safe by you first and chosen by you first. And then what it does is it removes the pattern of relationship where you're seeking other people to confirm your choosability, when you're seeking other people to bring the groundedness to your experience, when you're seeking other people to rescue you and protect you. When you do it for yourself, you take away the job from another person, and then you're no longer attracted to or wanting to choose people who you're waiting to save you and protect you. What you're attracted to starts to change because you're not trying to fill this, what you think is a flaw or a hole within yourself. What you start to seek is from this whole space, which you are whole. It's just that boundaries make you feel whole. You have to have boundaries to experience wholeness. And so when you actually step into that space of wholeness, then now this is where the money hits the road, because now all of a sudden you can love people from a place where you don't need them to complete you. You don't need them to save you. And that makes your love not come from a needy place. It comes from a loving and a free place. So that's the jam, man, you know? And I think that that's an important subject to really pay attention to, because this is a dance. It's always a dance, you know? Learning this is always a dance. And it's why we're here on this planet, is to learn about this. You know, you're not supposed to have it all figured out. That would make life really boring if we had it all figured out, right? But you are supposed to learn from life. You're not supposed to repeat patterns. You're supposed to repeat them till your fucking face grinds in the ground and you feel the pain of your repeated patterns, you know? So this is really about, where are you hurting and where do you need to expand and grow? You know, that's what this is really about, is where you feel pain or where you feel resentment or where you feel anger is a space where you need a boundary. You need to rise, you know? And what's often happens, and I think this is true for everybody, not just women, but I think it's especially true for women, is that you're afraid of your own power. You're afraid of your own voice, because we have sent the message, especially from patriarchy, that a good woman is one who's quiet and just does the stuff for us. That's such bullshit, right? Because we're really in this space now where we need empowered women. And not everyone's going to like empowered women, right? Especially true in this day and age. But we need it. We need you alive. And that's true of men too. We need you in your authentic, integrated self-expression. And everything in between. I don't mean to be like isolating the genders here. But all humans integrated between this balance of masculine and feminine and integration. That's what brings inspiration. And it's scary to step into that space. It's scary to be your authentic self. It's scary to be integrated and bring both the lover and the warrior, the adult in you, to the relationship. But remember, the same thing that is required of you in relationship to everything is the same thing that's required of us collectively, politically, collectively, religiously, collectively as a society and as a group of people. We need to experience individual healing and individual authenticity, because what that does is it causes and creates and shares and invites a society that steps into authenticity, a society that's not afraid of people who go against the grain. You know, we're in such a fascinating time where, you know, there is so much resistance to freedom. And it lives in the ethers of our systems, you know? It lives in the ether of our systems. And, you know, you see this in the conversations that we're having politically, the conversations we're having about abortion, the conversations we're having about religion, about women, about Me Too, about men, about all these different conversations are about how do we operate from our hearts instead of from our fears, you know? If I wasn't comfortable in who I am, then who you choose to be and how you choose to live your life will rock me. It will threaten everything in my life if your authenticity scares me. And, you know, it's a beautiful time to be alive. And I think it's important to remember that it takes an awful lot of things and moments to get just right for you to be here today. It takes an awful lot of special, serendipitous, synchronistic moments for the music to be played, the parents that you had that had sex to make you to combine that sperm and that egg, and all of these things. And, you know, I don't think that life is purposeless. I don't think we're just a bunch of mammals that got born into this experience and we're just here to hump and make kids and pass on a species. You know, I really think we're here for more than that. We're here to help transform each other. We're here to give. We're here to receive too. You're here to receive love. It's not just about giving it. And I think if we're in this conversation, then if you're in this today and you're here, recognize how divine it is that you're here and that you're here to do something. You're here to rise up somehow. And there's probably a part of you and your voice that you have been hiding. And it is time to step into it. It's time to actually rise. I remember my first coach said to me, when I was afraid to start, there was two things that he said. One was, how arrogant of you to believe that your gifts are for you. Every day that you don't start because you're afraid, other people don't get to experience what you've learned. And you're not the source, you're the conduit. And I thought, wow, that's fucking crazy. And I think the more authentic you are, the more you become a conduit for what is truth, what is your truth, not mine, but yours. And I think there are collective truths versus our own personal truths. The other thing, when I was afraid to do videos, I was really afraid to do videos just because of all of the judgments that can happen. You watch these people get butchered on social media, and that happens sometimes to me, but you start to realize that sharing what is true for you is more important than the people it challenges. Not more important than them specifically, but more important than their opinions. And I think this is true. It doesn't matter what your mission is. Your mission can just be to be yourself, which I think is a fucking great mission. Because that's such a gift to everybody. And think about what that teaches your children, to be themselves, to be authentic, to speak for themselves. And we often speak that out of children. We don't want them to step into their power. We don't want, their curiosity. We don't want, but we celebrate, like, what do you dream of being? And then when they become adults, we're like, no, but that's not realistic, right? I feel like there's so many adults walking around who had dreams, but then they do the same thing to younger versions of themselves, to kids. The other thing, so when I was afraid to do video, my friend Kelsey from Radical Self-Love said to me, you can be addicted to your dream. You can be committed to your dreams or your excuses, but you can't be committed to both. And I remember being like, fuck, that's so true, and you can't simultaneously be committed to your dreams and what you want and at the same time also live in excuses. And we all have that, We all have ways we want to protect ourselves from being rejected, especially collectively, But if I made your guys' opinions of me more important than sharing today, I'd never share. And I would never say anything controversial, And that's scary to say controversial things. It's also scary to say things that are political. It's scary to say things that I know to be true for me, but it hurts someone else sometimes because that truth might hurt their feelings. But at the same time, it's like you have to start to realize that it's about, at the end of the day, if your message yourself and how you speak to anybody, including in your relationships, and the courage you find to share how you feel, if it comes from a place of caring and love, even if it hurts them, it's necessary. I was saying to John Kim, the Angry Therapist, on Instagram, he's great, check him out. I was saying to him today that desire to be honest and that desire to be authentic and outspoken or whatever it is, that is so contagious. That from that space, everything is birthed, and that happens in your experience in relationship of just being honest with your partner. And again, that transcends to everything you do. John Kim, from the Angry Therapist is his Instagram handle, and he's great. He's super real. I love all of you guys. I hope you have the most wonderful day. This will stay on Instagram Live, and then I'll get it edited and uploaded to Instagram TV. So I just want you to find this message with so much love. Know that it's okay to be lost. Know that it's okay to not know where you're going. Know that it's okay to not have it figured out. Know that when you are in a place where you're uncertain, you're in the birth of something new. And that's a really beautiful place to be. That's why when you're in a conflict with someone and you say something different than you've ever said, you're now creating a totally different story than you've ever been in. But you have to start to fall in love with uncertainty. You have to start falling in love with curiosity. You have to start falling in love with not knowing. And when you do that, you know that you're creating a story that's new when you don't know how it's going to work out. And that's the only way to live. That's the way the world expands. Love you all.